right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Roderick Lewis, and you're here today for our Employee Relations Managers panel. And we're excited to have this panel today. We're excited to have this discussion with you for all of our corporate partners and Career Center professionals, students, staff, faculty who were able to join us today. We thank you for deciding to spend this time with us today. So before we get started, just wanted to go over a few details of how this panel is going to function today and what's going to happen. And so we really, want you to learn from these professionals that work within career centers, and their primary job roles are within employer and alumni relations. And we want to look at how their planning has changed or how their strategies have changed this fall, given the heightened awareness around structural racism and COVID-19. And we believe this is relevant because the world around us affects what we do. So we're not immune to the goings on of things happening around us. And we certainly have to, pivot and deal with these challenges as we support our students and our employer partners, stakeholders, and others. And so I invite you, I'm here as a moderator, but I'm also here as a learner. And so I'll be taking notes. And so if you see me looking down, it's because I'm taking notes from these panelists who I respect and know that they have a lot to bring and educate us on. But I also encourage you to do the same. So I really encourage you to take notes, see what you can learn, reflect on, and take action on. And, feel free to reach out to us after the end of this discussion. So the audience is on mute by default, so only the panelists will be speaking during this session. But I encourage you to use the Q&A button. So I asked the panelists, while others are speaking, that they can engage with the audience, and so they can answer some of the questions. You may hear a panelist say something, and you may want to ask, hey, could you repeat that? And they can type that in when they're not speaking, if they're able to, or I can try to do that as well. So we really invite you to be engaged with us today. The webinar is being recorded, so if you're online now, you're registered, or whether you signed up and couldn't attend or you had to leave early, no worries. It is recorded, and you will receive a recording by email sent by Zoom afterwards. Finally, most of us are working from home, or so we're relying on our personal home networks. And as such, there's always that potential for technical difficulties. We don't have our wonderful IT staff at our offices, and so if those things happen, we're going to keep it moving. So they know they will, log back on when they can. If I go down, hey, they definitely would continue without me. They would keep the discussion going. I've got about 2 or 3 backup plans in place in case I go down, so I'll be logging back in quickly if that does happen. We were supposed to have bad weather here in North Carolina today, but it looks clear and sunny, so I'm very excited about that. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead, introduce, let our panelists introduce themselves. But before I do that, I just want to, recognize that, we have a lot of people that are dealing with a lot of things right now, right? From students, staff, professionals, everyone. So we're all human, and we want to acknowledge that. We want to acknowledge that as we get ready to open up, our universities and even our K through 12 institutions, that there, a lot of our students and employees and staff, there is concern. So we do want to acknowledge that. We don't want to take anything lightly. So we're just here to discuss how we're navigating this environment and the plans that we have to take into consideration as professionals. So with that being said, today we have our panelists from Northwestern University, from Miami University, and from University of Delaware. And so I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. So we'll start off with Jenny.
Thanks so much, Roderick. Hi, everybody. My name is Jenny Harkleroad. Appreciate very much what you shared, kind of opening. I think at this point, a noisy 9-year-old is a technical difficulty that scares me more than my internet connection, but we are all doing the very best we can. So again, I'm Jenny Harkleroad. I am the director of the Employer Relations team at Northwestern Career Advancement, which is the central career office at Northwestern University. So I have a pleasure of leading the team there that helps our employers connect with our very talented Northwestern students, freshmen through PhD.
Thank you. Sharon, would you go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sharon Attaway. I'm Director of Employer Relations for Miami University Center for Career Exploration and Success. We are located in Southwest Ohio. We like to think we are the original Miami, much to the chagrin of the University of Miami colleagues. We serve about 17,000 undergrads, 2,600 graduate students, and just delighted to be here.
Thank you. Next, Lynn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lynn Epps, and I'm the Senior Associate Director for Employer and Alumni Engagement with the University of Delaware Career Center. We are a centralized career center, and we are located in the great state of Delaware. Let's see, what else? 24,000 students, undergraduate and graduate, and we have 9 colleges as well as the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration. And we work pretty closely very closely with our Learner Career Center, which is Learner Career Services Center, which is the business college. And so we work together pretty closely as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. You know, I've got a list of questions here, but before I ask, the first one, I just want to ask, how are you doing? So how, these past several months, how have things affected you? Because we get so focused on our work life, right? And the things we have to do as professionals, but there's that personal component. So Jenny, I want to start with you. Just, the past, several months, just, tell us a high level overview of just kind of how that's impacted you as a person.
Sure, absolutely. And first of all, I appreciate the question. I think that oftentimes, maybe pre-COVID, we would ask the folks sort of like, hey, how are you? And we meant it in almost a rhetorical way. And lately, it feels like that question lands a little bit differently. I was sharing with one of our employer partners this morning that I have good days and I have bad days. And I'm trying to be very both candid and vulnerable about both of those things. I miss my staff. I miss my teammates. I miss our students. I miss the energy that our students being on campus brings. I think we are all doing the very best we can to find new ways to be able to forge community and connectivity across the miles in this sort of new virtual and remote environment. Just yesterday, we learned that my daughter's school is going to be completely virtual starting this fall. So we are carving out some new workspaces in our home and learning to navigate that. But good days and bad days, but trying very hard to focus mostly on the good ones.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And Sharon, what about you?
Yeah, so I echo a lot of what Jenny has shared. I think I think I shared earlier that those first few weeks of COVID, it was about hitting our virtual stride, and I think we're there. I think we've adapted really well as a team, but there's a lot of ambiguity. And in leading an ambiguity it can be challenging at times, but I think the team and I have risen to the challenge. And then, as a center and even as an institution, we're doing the best that we can in trying to account for and serving the needs of so many people. And it's about taking moments of self-care. I will readily admit I took 2 days away from the screens on Monday and Tuesday, and it was the best medicine for the soul, just to come back and kind of round the turn to the fall semester.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Lynn.
Okay, so I echo Jenny and Sharon. And I also think, when I thought about this actually and talked with some friends, I feel as though every emotion that is available and known, I probably have experienced it in the last several months, and some that I probably don't have words to express what it actually is I'm feeling. So that's probably in a nutshell. I think I've been both, especially when I look through the prism sort of COVID-19 and the things that we're seeing around racism and anti-racism and all of those areas, that I've been, like I said, I've been encouraged, encouraged to see the work, and thinking that hopefully we're moving from a moment to a movement in some cases when it comes to dealing with some of these areas. And then also, I think just working with our teams in the midst of all of this has been, I'm going to give them a shout out. They are amazing at the University of Delaware Career Center teams. And it has been a pleasure working with them in the midst of this. If I had to work with anybody in the midst of this trouble and trial, it would be with this team. So, and encourage in that way. And there's also the one thing I think about, like our community has been so affirming to one another. And so I'm appreciative and grateful for that. I think there's been a lot of synergy, a lot of support. It's even to what you're doing right now, Roderick, is setting this up so that we can all connect. And so that's also encouraging as well. And I also see some opportunity, right? So I think that in the midst of all this trouble and trial, there's definite ways of opportunity and some hope. And so, yeah, Again, all the emotions.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, but thank you. Well, I echo Jenny, Sharon, and Lynn. So I'm going to trump everybody. So I echo each of you. You're exactly right. So I went through all the same types of emotions, and really, like you said, just grateful to have a like a rock star team that I really rely on. Um, and I was sharing with you guys earlier. You would see all these reports with people like, oh yeah, I get to spend more time with my kids and family. But I'm sick of my kids. I don't want to see them anymore. I mean, so I don't know about everybody else, but I'm just going to tell the truth. I am sick of my kids. Like, I've seen them too much. So I actually need a break, a vacation from them. So as much as I can get away from them, I am trying my best. So, but, in all seriousness, there was a lot, like you said, going on for us to deal with personally. And you have an appreciation for that when I had to go visit my parents, and I was still trying to work, and it was so difficult. And so then it helps you get into the space of students who had to go back to places where they don't have that space to operate like they did in the campus environment, or where they were potentially staying off campus in a place where they had the setup that they needed to be successful, or just not having access to these spaces that you can get to. So there's so many different things that you had to take into consideration. And I was able to empathize with that, a little bit when I tried to, spend time at my parents' house. But I just really, it was so difficult. I didn't have that space, right? I couldn't do the things that I normally could do in my own space. And so that's something that, we definitely as professionals want to acknowledge, because it does give us a little skin in the game. And, with our, professional colleagues and stakeholders and internal stakeholders, our faculty as well. I talked to some of them, and, it's not easy for them either. So thank you, everybody for sharing that. So let me ask my, first question I have here, and I'm going to start out with you, Sharon, on this one. In what ways have the heightened awareness, on structural racism and COVID-19, how has that impacted your employee engagement plans this fall? So I know it's a broad question, but just kind of, high level, how has that impacted your employee engagement plans?
Yeah, so I think if nothing else, it's given us an opportunity to kind of rethink and refocus our conversations with our employers, especially in the new relationships we're building, because we're still building new relationships. And even as we're supporting existing relationships, we're taking the time out now to make deliberate inquiry into the work of employers as it's related to DEI. I will say one thing that I'm super excited about. One of the plans we're going to pilot this fall is that we're offering 2 DEI mastermind programs, cohorts. We're still landing on a name for it. My colleague, Takia Howard, who heads up our diversity initiatives, and I. So imagine over a 2-month period, we're going to lead employers in a process of self-evaluation, reflection, and facilitated conversation, because our goal is to really break down the barriers relevant to launching students' careers, and to create safe places for employers to engage in that peer-to-peer dialogue that's going to educate, help them evaluate, and even elevate the DEI best practices, and then helping them to create those professional lifelines. So that's something we're super excited about, that I think it came really almost as an intentional result of the conversation relevant and the heightened awareness around racism in particular. And then in terms of COVID-19, we're a campus, everything's going to be virtual this year, right? So, whereas we would have had an in-person large scale recruiting event, we're now, with our employers' input, we're hosting 3 boutique style events to better connect students and employers. And so, like so many campuses, we're a handshake campus, there's a lot of trust, there's a lot of blind faith into, being able to make this happen. And so one thing that in particular that we're being ever so mindful of is with the handshake platform and first year students' engagement in that process in particular, and knowing that we're going to have to reimagine something for first years so that they too can have that early engagement with employers, and employers can have that early pipeline engagement as well. So we're thinking that's going to happen after our broader boutique events that are being launched September 9th, 10th, and 11th. This event will actually happen in mid-October. So that's kind of like really high level to respond to your question.
No, thank you. Thank you. Excellent. Lynn, would you like to respond to that question as well? Oh, you're on mute. Don't, you're going to hear a lot of that. I'm going to, it happens.
First of all, I knew that was going to happen. And at least I know everybody, this has happened to you at least once, if not
Yes.
today. So
Yes.
we're in this together. So I would say, similar to what Sharon said, I think it is giving us an opportunity to rethink and reimagine sort of how we approach working with employers in this particular area, because we've done some events in the past, sort of, diversity recruiting fairs and diversity events and things of that nature. I would say one practical thing that this has done for us is, we're developing our outreach list for the fall, right? So employer engagement and outreach. And so one of the things that we have intentionally added is the assessment question around what are they doing in terms of DE&I? What does their organization look like? And so the other thing that we're doing, and this is more of a center-wide initiative, is doing what we're calling an archaeological dig to find out what are best practices with employers and as well as career centers in this space, and how are others supporting students, and then what can we learn from others as well. So I think from a practical perspective, it's definitely making us think about assessing and questioning and asking employers. One thing we had a webinar actually last week, and we asked several employers. I think we had 60 employers on the call, and we asked them about DE&I initiatives in their company and where were they? What was their, where were they at? Did they have initiatives? Did they not have initiatives? And it runs the gamut. And so I think we also have to be mindful of that as we're working with employers, that there are some who have nothing, and then there are many who are sort of the leaders of the pack. And I think we also just have to adjust and, be mindful that we're all in this together and we're all working towards it, but that there are opportunities that exist.
Yep. Thank you, Lynn. Jenny.
It's hard to top those two answers. So I'll just be brief in underscoring, I think, particularly what Lynn and Sharon talked about with respect to DEI initiatives. If your company has affinity groups, things like that, I think we've really been encouraging organizations to integrate that as a part of what they talk about when they introduce their company. Every time they talk about and introduce their company, we don't want to see this just be sort of one-off slide in the overall presentation, but really talking about why diversity matters to your company, being authentic with that answer. I think the other thing we've been really doing is informally kind of advocating for some best practices and guidelines around what this virtual space is going to look like. And really encouraging employers, I think, as we always have, but maybe using different language this year, about how much representation really matters. So being really thoughtful about who you bring, and I'll say to campus, and I'll put that in quotes in our virtual space, how you talk about what you're going to cover in your information session, what portion of that is going to be spent talking a little bit about identity in your workplace. Those types of things, I think, are conversations that, while again, I think we've always tried to have with employers, I think we've been able to put them much more front and center. And that for me is really exciting.
Yeah, it's great, Jenny. And this is one of those questions where we literally can make the whole webinar just about this one question, right? I mean, because there's so many, cool things that are going on in this space. And there's, a lot of leadership in this space, like, with what you just talked about. One of the cool things we're doing is we're developing a DEI scorecard. So we want to, do that hardcore research that Lynn talked about. So I actually got some people doing that research now on our employer partners, and really doing a deep dive and really, across several, criteria that we've developed. And, the ultimate goal is for us to, really jazz it up. Like, we want to build a dashboard, right? And so something that not only students can use, but also staff, faculty, and our employer partners. So much like, Tableau style FBS, data, right? So we want to be able to have, and it's not to name and shame any type of company, but what it is actually, it's more, we're trying to position ourselves as consultants and advisors to our employer partners. And we have a unique set of, insights and knowledge, as you alluded to, Jenny, and sharing, what we have on the inside in terms of our students and learning from our student-facing teams and understanding what concerns our students have. Then how do we help employers, with their messaging, right? How do we help them understand, like you said, Lynn, there are a lot of small companies or companies that they just don't have that DEI ERGs and all these, strategies in place, but what are things they can do? And what are some things that, including startups, what are things that they can do that are in their peer group. So if we can show them like, hey, here's some companies that are a similar size or a similar geography or a similar, type of what have you, here's some things that they're doing, and you can use this dashboard to say, oh, okay, I see where they are across these metrics. What are some things we can learn from them, right? So that's one of the big things. And of course, it's a webinar series. We have an inclusive workplace leadership webinar series where we're inviting companies to talk about those things that they're doing in their companies, around DEI and what that means, right, to that particular company, and really honing in on, what are you doing specifically with your Black employees, right? Because a lot of times, that gets lost under the umbrella of diversity, but there are really some specific, problems and initiatives and challenges that face, Black students and Black employees. So we don't want to run from that. We really want to just, ask about that and help employers, understand that those are the things that they need to include in their messaging, or have some responses should, students ask about those. And even if students don't ask about them, to be able to share with, your non-Black, recruits and professionals, like, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's how we support, people of color, Blacks in particular, and here's some programs, because those conversations, they don't need to only be had with the choir, they need to be had with the whole congregation, so to speak, right? So cool thing. So like I said, we can stay on this topic forever, but I'm gonna move on to the second question. And Jenny, I'm gonna start out with you on this question. What updates, if any, have you made to your OCR policies? And for anyone who doesn't know when I'm talking about OCR, I mean on-campus recruiting policies. Just around any of your internships and co-ops or OCR diversity statements. What are some any of those changes you've made to your policies that you share with employers and students?
Yeah, sure. So I think first I'll say that informally, I think we've been doing a lot of the things that we were just talking about, right? Sort of how do we encourage best practices, and how do we think about shaping guidelines to make sure that the way our employers are showing up to campus is connecting best with our students. Formally, in terms of our policies, I think we've made a lot of changes. First and foremost, I think we've thought differently about timelines and offer guidelines. Now that we're in this virtual space, it looks a little bit different to recruit our students when you're doing it not constrained by physically coming to campus. We've thought a lot about what it means to kind of, let's say, no show for an interview. And while we still take that very seriously, we've thought a lot about how we talk to students about what that looks like and what are some of the constraints we want to be aware of that might get in the way of a student being able to attend an event. I think maybe most central to this discussion, we crafted what we would call kind of a COVID impact statement. And this was really the start of our policy where we talked a lot about what this means to students, and specifically thinking a lot about things like GPA cutoffs, for example, that we know can disproportionately affect our students of color. What does it mean that at Northwestern, we didn't have a GPA at all for the entire spring quarter? There's movement right now for our students looking at whether or not we should have a GPA for the fall quarter. Asking our employers to kind of re-examine and reevaluate what these cutoffs can mean, what their sort of, let's say, typical parameters around a kind of successful candidate looks like. Asking them to think a little bit differently, maybe a kinder, gentler, dare I say, kind of way of evaluating candidates that keeps in mind that, students might have had plans to have an internship experience that was canceled, do something that was truncated in some way, that they had to pull out from maybe a really amazing opportunity this summer because they had to care for, a family member, or that the world is really heavy right now, right? So those are some of the things that we've been talking to employers about. We also, I would say, made sure that our university non-discrimination policy was much more front and center in our policy. And on the student end of things, we're looking at a way to be able to make sure that should a student experience any discrimination in the interview process, that they have a mechanism to be able to raise that concern that is safe, that is clear, that is not something they feel like they have to chase down, and to make it clear that that's not something that we tolerate at Northwestern.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on this question? So this was what updates you've made to your OCR policies, in the face of COVID-19 and these other structural racism, this pandemic. Okay. All right. So I'll follow up with that as well, Jenny, because you and I we've talked about that a little bit, and definitely I think that it's important with those statements, including where you stand on that within your policies, because I think that does bring some clarity to both students and employers. And we put a Black Lives Matters statement on our website. Our executive director crafted a very good statement around that. And we also updated our OCR policies as well. And we still want to hold true to a lot of those late cancellation no-show policies. And but we do say, hey, we will just let us know. We'll take things into consideration case by case. And especially the big one is around reneges, right? I always say that the renege is the most egregious of all the the OCI on-campus interviewing sins, right? And so what does that mean in this space? Because reneges can go both ways now, right? We don't really know how the economy is going to change over the next several months. So the renege from a company is in the form of rescinding an offer, right? And so there's some things that we just have to do to try to educate on both sides and make sure that we're clear with the statements that we make around what it means if, especially what you said, interviewing. We've had some incidents in the past as well, and I believe a lot of times students feel like they're powerless because they don't know there's a huge power differential when you're an interviewee. And so how can we better educate our students as well, so that they know that no, there is something you can do. Let us know, let this appropriate person know, but also educating our employers before they even come on campus to interview about our expectations, and providing information for them day of when they were coming on campus, but now virtually, just making sure that, hey, here are our guidelines, so please follow these. So cool things on that. And so happy for us to discuss that more in detail as well at a later time. But next question I have is, and this one, we'll start out with you, Lynn, on this one. What are some recruitment and career development initiatives that employer relations managers can create with their employer and alumni partners to engage historically underrepresented student groups?
Yeah, sure. So I thought about this in sort of 3 different approaches, right? So I think that there is the very traditional approach of what I think we've seen, just in general, some practices around hosting diversity fairs and, a dining etiquette dinner and panels and workshops and mentorship programs and job shadows and things of that nature. So I think being able to carve out some opportunities that support underrepresented students, leveraging employers and alumni in those things, I think are helpful. We've done our share of those and have seen some success. So that's one area. The second area that I think about is we thought about specifically around, and this supports actually underrepresented students and all students, but one of the things that we're doing is finding out employers' needs, interests, and strengths in the DE&I space, right? And so, for example, from our fairs and meetups this year, for every employer that signs up, they're going to receive another survey that's asking specifically about DE&I in their organization, their strengths. Are they willing to do a workshop? Asking for information about their employee resource groups. And so, and someone asked this, I think Katie asked this earlier in the queue. Hi, Katie, about how are we going to use this research? Well, we're figuring this out, but the goal is to gather the information and then share that with students, right? So if you're coming to a fair that's supporting, behavioral health, and we have that information from employers who have listed how they support or their initiatives and their goals, and we push that out to students. And Roderick, you mentioned this earlier, it's not in any way to ding anybody if they don't have it, but it is to highlight those who do, right? And so that way we can let students know these are organizations that align and support and are there for you. So there's a traditional bucket, and there's a sort of what can we do now, which is assessing and finding out what our needs are or what employers' needs are. And the third area that I think actually for us, I think right now is probably the most important, is really stepping back to assess what are the needs and interests of our students. From a qualitative and a quantitative perspective. So and how do we meet those needs, right? Because a student that is underrepresented in business is going to have a different need than an underrepresented student that's in another discipline, right? So finding out what are they doing, where are their gaps, where are the opportunity areas, and really, again, looking at some data, talking to students to figure out what are they interested in, how can we support them. Then at the same time, we're talking to employers and alumni, and how can we support them, and then continue to grow and build hopefully new programming and new initiatives that can help us make even more impact. So those are the things that I think are probably really important. And the one thing I would say, I know that there's some employers on the call, is, you know, employers, just reach out to your career centers. We want to help and we want to work with you and we want to navigate this space with you. So continue to reach out to us. And there's, again, we've seen such a phase of disruption right now, right? So even I think there's an opportunity to disrupt some of the traditional things. So this is an opportunity for us to think about, what can we do differently? What can we do new? For lack of a better phrase, innovative, right? In order to make that positive impact. So.
That's great. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. You said a mouthful. So I hope people are taking notes. I'm taking copious notes here. So anybody else want to jump in on this one? I'm giving all the panelists a chance to jump in on these, because this is some good stuff. So, you know, I'll just come in on one of the things that, you know, I thought was very interesting, you know, that you said around this piece is the surveys, right? So I know our executive director, he commissioned a survey, particularly, you know, to understand the needs, you know, of our Black student population, right? And I've seen a number of other career centers, you know, have initiated, you know, some similar type of surveys as well. And so we want to really, you know, try to get, you know, like be data informed, right, with our decision making, because a lot of times you can just start throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping it sticks. But we don't really have the resources for that, right? I mean, you just can't do everything. So you have to be very strategic and like you said, surveying your employer partners. And you really touched on a good point, Lynn. I see that, you know, this pandemic, or these twin pandemics, have really, I would say, heightened the awareness of our roles and things that we can do, because, you know, if you traditionally look at the employee relations professionals, employee relations managers, it kind of serves as this connection point, right? This transactional point, so to speak, between, you know, employers and students, whether it's, you know, recruitment events or info sessions or networking, whatever that connection point is. And then, you know, there are other ways too, but just in a high level, let's just say our job is done if we connect, you know, make these connections, and then the magic happens from there. So it's kind of like this 50-50, right? We just meet in the middle. Whereas I'm seeing this, we should be going like 60, 70% on to the other side, right? And meaning getting closer into their organizations, like you said, with these surveys, you know, being invited to their planning meetings for campus recruitment, right? So really becoming a part of the fabric of, you know, especially your organizations that recruit the most at the university, versus it just being these two sides that just drift and meet together when it's time for recruitment, right? So moving beyond that transactional and really get more to transformative, and vice versa, having them move a little more onto the other side of the pendulum as well, and not just this middle point, but hey, you know, inviting them, you know, in the form of these employee advisory boards and other types of things that career centers do to get that input, and you know, in the beginning. And then another thing you said I think was interesting as well is you know, looking at, you know, how, I guess, you know, when you're looking at how employers engage on campus and the impact they can have, you know, through these various workshops or initiatives, you know, how do we leverage that more, right? Because then that's more of what I look at, more of the non-recruitment type of initiatives, more of your career development initiatives. So it's a win-win for everybody. But again, really going back and looking at, you know, the data, and trying to understand, you know, who are we trying to impact? Because a lot of times I think when we just throw everything out, you're not moving the needle. And so we have there's a couple of issues. So diversity is defined different at everybody's university, right? Like, so I'm curious, let me ask that question. Jenny, how do you define diversity at your university than at your career center? Like, you know, we talk about these diverse groups, like what is that?
Yeah, that's a hard question, right? Because we're talking about it in, I would say, kind of concentric circles, right? Sometimes we talk about it and we are referring to students of color. Sometimes we talk about it and we're referring to students who are first gen or low income, right? And while all of those different categories, you know, can have overlap in terms of shared identities, right, or multiple identities. Those are also distinct groups. And so one of the things I think for us that we've really try to encourage our employers to think about is that if you're going to do an event under kind of this auspice of diversity, be really clear about who your target audience is, right? So don't do sort of this umbrella diversity term and ask students to self-select in or out of that and decide whether or not that means them, right? Are you talking about students who identify as LGBT? Are you talking about students with disabilities? Really think a lot about what that means to you and how identity and representation matter, because what our students have told us is that if they go to an event expecting that event to be something where they can connect with somebody with a shared identity, and they look around the room and they don't see anyone that maybe looks like them or that maybe has that shared identity, there can be kind of a confusion about whether or not that there's a sense of belonging at the event, and it has the exact opposite of the intended purpose. So while I think it's okay for organizations to do things where they're talking about kind of multiple identities and how that matters to your organization, I also think that there's a lot to be said for doing things where you're really clear. If it's an event for Black students, call it that. Say that it's an event for Black students. Invite Black students to come out and talk about what it means to be Black at your organization.
Very good comment. Thank you. Yeah, because we've got to define so many different ways. I mean, it turns out so this university has definition, but then corporations have how they define their D&I, and that could be through their ERGs or any number of affinity groups. Then we as a career center, we have target populations that we've defined based on the underutilization of our career services, and then I use a term called special student populations, where under my special student populations banner, there's two pillars. So you have your underrepresented, ethnic, racial, ethnic minority students. Then you have your underserved student majors, right? So these are majors that they really are the ones that don't get all the fanfare like our liberal arts majors, but they're the ones that go on to do a lot of great things. But companies are not just making a beeline to the career center. So I want to hire these students that tend to focus on the tech and the business type students and healthcare related students. So I'm looking at, hey, these majors are underserved in terms of how we have been serving them just at our institution, and how we can just do more to make sure that they get a light shined on them from our external partners. So I think a lot of that definition, I think, like you said, just being clear on who you're targeting, and making sure that when you're sending people in virtual spaces or on campus or whatever, what does the reflection look like in terms of alignment with that particular population of students that you're trying to engage with. So excellent. That's another we can stay on as well, and because that was a deep one, because it gets at the heart of your strategy, right? And then it not only our strategy, but the strategy that we want to help our corporate partners engage in as well. My next question, I'm gonna start off with you again, Sharon, but this is one we've touched on in a sense, and it's really about, given COVID-19 and its heightened awareness around structural, racism. I want to know how that's changed your conversations. We're all employee relations professionals, so we're talking to employers a lot. How has it changed the types of conversations you have with employers? We talked about it, around workplace culture, around, their recruitment practices, around their diversity, around, safety, standards, their protocols that they're putting in place for COVID-19. How does it change your conversations?
Yeah, I think first of all, you got to have the conversation. You got to ask the questions. So I think, in the early days of COVID, when some of the employers were trying to consider whether or not they could actually bring interns on site, safety's top of mind. And so we had to ask the questions, how are you intending to keep our students safe? And, we all have public health officials that we've been leaning into for their advice and guidance. And we were expecting employers to hold those standards in the highest of regard, if indeed they were inviting students, if they were hosting students in person. For the lion's share, though, many of our employers just simply created virtual internships for those that could support students. And for the earlier comment, it was really geared more for like our students who engineering majors, very hands-on kind of internships. But I will say the lion's share everything's been moved to virtual internship. So it's like now it's about the onboarding process. What does mentoring look like? How are students evaluated? And so making certain that the students have that lifeline, that safety, that support system, because even though, you know, I'm actually working with 2 students, they're consulting us to lift up one of our fairs, which that's been a lot of fun, but I'm seeing these 2 young women give of their time to us before they're starting their virtual internship. And even looking at the spaces that they have at their disposal, this is their quiet space to do an accounting internship. So all of these things have to be factored in. I say that from the employer side, you know, making certain that you're providing that support to students who, all things being equal, students, the space that they can even participate in their internship may look dramatically different. We talk about barking dogs and crying kids. Well, what about students who might be, who just don't even have a quiet place to go to, that it's a shared space? So just making employers mindful of that. And for the most part, I've heard really good feedback from students who, and employers with respect to how they've navigated this summer. And I think that there are remarkable stories that need to be showcased on the other side of that. And I'm encouraging employers to capture those moments so that they can build those experiences into their virtual recruiting of the next the next class that they're going to be onboarding. Hopefully it won't be virtual, but just in case it is, they've got powerful stories now to share. I hope that answered.
Yeah. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer here. I mean, really, it really is what you're sharing from your campus, your perspective, and things that you've seen and strategies. So we're here to learn. And so I appreciate that. That's very, very insightful.
Well, and I think too, it's just really about asking questions in the moment too. I think if nothing else, this summer has prepared us to not shy away from difficult questions, challenging questions. If you think it, I think you got to ask it at the end of the day, because again, information is important as we're helping employers. Again, that expectation management, that's all that this is, right?
Yeah. Great.
Sharon, I think you said something that is really important, which is that there was an opportunity, as everybody suddenly was working remotely, for a lot of the employers that we work with to really model wellness in a very different way for our students. I think oftentimes, especially our traditional age students, have this idea that they're going to start on the job, and that first year, like, all they're going to do is work, right? And then that's how they show sort of their dedication to the role. And I have been delighted to see the way in which the employers that we work with will talk about, you know, that they are taking midday breaks to go walk, or they're integrating, you know, 5 minutes of mindfulness or meditation, right, as a part of their daily rhythms. Now, part of it is probably survival, as we are all looking for coping mechanisms. But I also think it's been really nice for our students to see that, and to see the ways in which they can be authentically themselves in their first role, which is, if there's any sort of silver linings, and I am always looking for silver linings, I think that has been one of them. It's been a nice opportunity for our students to see our employers in very different lights, and maybe be a little bit more authentic to what their home life looks like. I will just also add with the question, I think specifically around the space of thinking about equity and inclusion, I think that it's changed our conversations in the sense that the conversation has felt more urgent in a good way, that there's more of an imperative for our employers to really think about what this looks like front and center. But I would also say that I think that I've been encouraging employers to, Lynn mentioned before, kind of not wanting to shame anyone who feels like, hey, our statements or our process, or even sort of our workforce, is not as diverse as we would like it to be. I also think that this is a great opportunity for companies to be able to be really transparent about what their goals are. I think that what students are looking for more than anything is authenticity. They're looking for companies to not be performative with their diversity statements. And so I would encourage organizations that are on the call that are feeling like we're maybe not in that place that we want to be, to talk about that with students, because I think that they'll respond positively in terms of saying, this is the goal we have, this is the way we're integrating this is how we plan to change as a company. And I think that that's every bit as important than putting up kind of a one-off statement and then not feeling like you have anything behind it.
I love that. Lynn?
Well, actually, Jeannie, the one thing that I was thinking was exactly that. Be authentic, right? Be authentic with where you are, because we all have work to do, right? Because if we didn't, we wouldn't be in this situation. So being authentic, and then also, and this might go into one of the other questions, Roderick, but
That's
really
fine.
thinking about from the employer side, just reaching out to the Career Center teams and letting us know how we can support you as well. I've been on several calls this summer, and I'm pleased to say that most of the employers, it was one of their first questions, to us was, what are you all, here's what we're looking for in terms of connecting with students and opportunities. And so I was actually, I was encouraged to see a lot of employers taking the initiative to lead in some of those conversations in terms of talking about what they're doing and what they look to do. And some of them were very honest with us as well. Like, we're not that diverse. Like, we don't have it, but here's what we want to do. And we can work with that, right? We can all work with that.
No.
And so, yeah. And I think also one thing that's important is for employers, even career centers, for all of us to tell your story of sort of what you're doing and where you're at, right? So employers, we saw all the Black Lives Matter statements on all the websites over the last, several months, and that's great. I think an opportunity for all of us in this space right now is to think about, and I know we'll be doing this too. Okay, so what have we done in the last 3 months, right? What action has been taken, and what are we doing for the next 3 to 6 months? I think that also helps people when we think about student expectations and when they're looking at employers, is to see that it's not just a one and done. It wasn't just because it was popular this summer, but no, this is an ongoing process, and these are the markers that are going to show that we're moving in this direction.
I love it. No, you're right. Because now we're speaking consulting language now, right? Like the great Mark Constantino would say, what constitutes success, right? Because you do have to get some definite strategy and some metrics, because a lot of it will be that knee-jerk reaction, right? There'll be this hiring spree for diversity managers, a hiring spree for Black candidates, but ultimately, the harder work is the structural part, right? The policies, the practices, the unwritten things. That's where nobody wants to touch. Nobody wants to go into that. And so it's easy, like you said, Jenny, to do the performative statements and things because it looks like you're doing something. I mean, it really looks good, right? I mean, it's like, you got to give it to it because it looks good. I mean, it's like, wow, there's like action, right? But it's like what I call the fake hustle, right? It looks like you're doing a lot of work, but you're really not. And so I think we play a role in that just with this platform that we're using now, but having those conversations with our employer partners, getting information from our internal stakeholders, our student, staff, and faculty, and really being able to have that dialogue. Because if you don't have the dialogue, you can't even begin to think about strategy and action and what makes sense for your company, right? So I always say, look at your company. Don't try to blueprint what somebody else is doing. You can learn from that, but ultimately, I was talking to a company about, we were talking about diversity, and I said, come on, let's drop the diversity banner. Like, what do you really like? Who are you really targeting? And let's just, and so then, person was able to say, okay, this is what we're really targeting, right? And I said, okay, now we can get somewhere. Because if we just keep saying, hey, I'm just trying to hire diverse students, I mean, I don't know what that means, right? And so, but I know what it means, but it's like, we're going to keep doing this song and dance until somebody says, you know what, let's just be real. You're talking about Black students, right? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, well, let's name it, right? Because there's some things we can now talk about it, and it's not a bad thing. If you look at your space and you say, no, because of the way we've done business, we haven't really tried to recruit Black students or Black employees, and that has a damaging effect on us because that's a talent pool that we're not even tapping, and then it reinforces these stereotypes, and we could be missing out on clients and these different ideas that come from people that have a different mindset, different experience. There's all these things that I think when we have those conversations as employee relations professionals, then we can help change the narrative for our corporate partners, right? And so we've got to help, especially the ones who may not be in that space or who are trying to grow into that space, and helping them to say, hey, just present that authentic message to these students, say, hey, we're not where we want to be, but we're looking at candidates like you to help us get there. And here's, like you said, Jenny, here's what we're doing internally to make sure that the environment that you come into is welcoming, inclusive, you feel a sense of belonging. You don't feel like just a token hire. You don't feel like we're just checking the box just to, show that we're doing some performative act. So a lot of good stuff on that, a lot of good stuff. Next question, Lena, you kind of alluded to this, or we kind of got into this, but this is a question about equity, right? So this is a question about COVID-19 and how it really does shine that bright light on, equity of access and opportunity to jobs in this virtual space. And so what I want to ask you, and this would be for our other panelists too, is, what more do you think employers could do to mitigate these student concerns?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One I would say is, because I thought about this from the context of sort of, if an employer has opportunities, or if they're, working to dismantle racism and anti-racist policies, it's really about how do we let students know, right? How are we letting students know what we're doing is really important. And then also talking about managing the sort of the expectations around that. So I thought the first thing I would think is for employers to really, again, reach out to your career centers and let us know what's going on in terms of the work that you're doing and how we can support you, right? So showcasing some of the work and things that you're doing on our blogs and social media and things like that. Just getting the word out about what is actually taking place in terms of how you're supporting students with COVID-19 and what resources you have available. Things of that nature is one angle. But I think also in a very sort of practical way, and I saw this actually in the feed, and I'm not answering the Q&As just because it's awkward for me to type and talk. So just maybe we'll get to those at the end, just so you know, I'm not ignoring those questions. But Katie mentioned, like, she's an employer that's looking to support for webcams for interviews, right? And so I think we can work together to figure out, well, what are our needs and where are the resources and where do the two come together? So I think that's probably it's a higher level, not necessarily 1, 2, 3, do this, but I think that's an opportunity area for employers to think about how can they support the career centers and some of the gaps that may exist around opportunities. And so one other practical piece I thought about was when employers are posting opportunities, and we'll probably be virtual for a while, when you're posting those opportunities in whatever platform you're using, list it on the position description, laptop technology provided, or letting students know that you have the resources that they will need for this position. And so I think letting students know what resources are available is important as well. And then also the other piece about letting how employers can support students is, this is a very tactical thing. I saw just a few days ago in LinkedIn, there are a lot of recruiters now who've replaced their title with their company name, and it says is hiring. So now students can even go in there and see, Jim at, this company is currently hiring. And so when students are looking for needs in the midst of this COVID, in the midst of all of the challenges going on, again, very practical ways I think that employers can make themselves visible and show how they can support students. And then again, also partnering with our career centers and letting us know how we can support you to help continue to get the message out to students, what opportunities exist, how you are available to support them. Hopefully that answers.
Yeah, no, thank you. Sharon or Jenny, you want to jump in on this one?
I'll just add from a really practical standpoint, Lynn beautifully answered the question. We are looking at the availability, though we are operating largely remotely as a staff, for quiet spaces for interviews for our students. And we've been encouraging employers also to connect with students in advance of an interview, for example, and make sure that they have the technology needs that they need, whether or not, if the interview is going to have a video component to them, is there also then an opportunity for them to use their mobile device, et cetera. The technology gap is a big one, and it's one we're thinking a lot about. And so I think that the more we can encourage organizations to have those conversations up front, then the more we can hopefully do to mitigate some of those gaps in a way that doesn't feel extremely time crunched.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Jenny shared. We're doing similar things within our career center. The interview space that would have been dedicated, we're fortunate that we have dedicated interview space, an abundance of rooms, and so we're making them available to students. And we're actually doing an intake form for students to letting us know what their needs are so that we can respond in advance. So I think the big thing here is going to be all about communication, both on the employer side as well as students, and making it inviting for students to share their needs with us.
That's great stuff, and I assure the audience, we did not, coordinate responses. So what you're getting are, just the raw responses from the, perspective of our panelists. But I echo everything you said. We were looking at the same thing. We looked at, okay, well, how can we use our space, creatively, right? So if we're not going to have, students in the space from, how we would normally use it, where we can, I mean, in terms of employer interviews and all of that, where we could use, since we're going to be all virtual, that we could use our classroom spaces that we have in our career center and our interview suites as quiet spaces for students to go when they want to listen to a webinar, when they want to do a virtual career fair, when they want to do an interview, or just to generally, explore, career opportunities using our resources and all of that. And so we were looking into that, early this summer. Is what's kind of got us hamstrung is just the protocols around cleaning, right? How do you do that piece? Because that's labor intensive, and any liability associated with that. And so it's just so many unknowns, and so many, we just haven't figured that out. I'll put it like that. And then the other thing, what we were doing to also be creative and to get our employer partners to support us, we reached out to some employers in the technology space and said, hey, do you have a loaner program where you can loan us some laptops? Because think about it from an equity standpoint, I've seen some of the laptops that our students have, and some of them are pretty raggedy. I mean, I'm not like, how is this thing still functioning? And so I know that it's one thing if you're just carrying around a little raggedy laptop and you're like, I'll just make, I'll survive because I'm still physically going to class. But now you're totally reliant on that laptop. So now that laptop is your lifeline. Like you can't no longer have a laptop that doesn't function. And so I was thinking that, well, maybe we can get some of our employer partners to loan us some laptops so that students can come to our space, like you talked about, Sharon and Jenny, to use it. We can have a process where we loan them out and you have it for a certain time. Again, just the protocols around cleansing and just how we just were up against the eight ball. So a lot of great ideas. It's just the implementation. That's the part that falls short because there's just too many unknowns around what that would mean and entail for our staff. But for our employer partners that are listening, there's so many ways that you can partner with us in these initiatives. So these are just things that we're thinking of. But if you think of some different ways that you can use your company's products or services, or even, I always say, I used to work in alumni relations, and said, we'll take your time, talent, and treasure. Whatever you want to give, we'll take it. We're not turning down anything, but, help us think of some ways that you can partner with us as well when it comes to how to mitigate, these equity of opportunity and equity of access challenges that a lot of students, may face. I don't know the exact numbers, but we know that in any society, in anywhere, in any environment, there'll be students who will face these challenges, and we don't know the percentages, but we just want to make sure we have some plans in place for those students who may feel like, wow, my laptop is just it's busted. What can I do? I can't, and maybe there's a process to get that, from the university, but if we have some in place, then that could be an additional support mechanism. So. That was the final, question in terms of, we touched on a lot of the other things. What I talked to you about earlier was that we would stay on a few minutes after, because we always have a little, that's when we really get into the good conversations. It starts getting good towards the end. But I realized I want to be conscious of time. I've set these webinars to an hour, but we could keep talking. I mean, we really are cutting things short, just so we can make sure we get the information that's most useful to our attendees. Again, this will be recorded, so whatever you miss, you will have it in the recording. I do want to ask this final question, and then if my panelists have time, we'll stay on and just do a little more chit chat for a few minutes. Jenny, I'm gonna start with you. What do you want the audience to take away from this webinar?
Well, I think that what's most important, and Lynn really said it best, right, is consider your career center to be, your strategic partner on campus. I don't think that anybody knows our students or cares for our students more than the people that work at the institution. And I think we are so invested in the shared goal of wanting to see our students find their match fit and fall in love with their career and land at your organization. And so my hope more than anything is that you can see that we are also navigating these complex issues, that we don't have perfect answers, but we are very willing to talk about them. We're willing to say when we don't know. We're willing to work with you. And I think more than anything, we ultimately want to collectively see our students be successful.
Thank you, Jenny. Lynn?
What she said, no. But no, to affirm, hopefully you feel affirmed because we're all in this together and that we are all committed to the same great work. And no, we're just here to support one another and impact our students positively. So hopefully you'll walk away with that. Thank you all.
Thank you. Last but not least, the great Sharon Attaway.
Oh, well, I think more than anything, we're witnessing in real time a community of care, and that us as professionals, folks who are committed to the work of career, and ultimately we are just so committed to launching the lives of all of our students. We want to ensure their happiness and success. And if nothing, COVID and this entire summer of heightened awareness with racism has brought us together as a community that cares so much. And I'm just excited by what's to come, really. And I wish everybody a very successful start to the fall semester. And I'm eager to see how we all land on the other side of it.
Well, thank you. That's a great way to wrap it up. I want to thank, our panelists, Jenny, Lynn, and Sharon, just for sharing their time with us today, their expertise. I love talking with them. I've got 2 pages of notes here. So as I said, I'm a learner here as well. Thank you to our participants today from wherever you are in the country, whatever corporation or university or whatever professional or student status you have. Thank you for joining us today. We really enjoy these conversations, and we're going to do it again. We're not going to. This won't be the end. So stay tuned. And if you need to log off now, no problem. I do want to turn to the after party, so to speak. And there is one question that I do want to ask my panelists, and this is more of a future, kind of, forecasting question. Where do you see like the role of the employee relations professional, now? I think it's receiving, heightened awareness as well, right? It's a spotlight on us as well, right? Just like there's a spotlight on D&I professionals and there's a spotlight on us. Where do you see our role evolving amid these twin pandemics in terms of how we, communicate to students that will be looking at us as these gateways, so to speak, of the employers that come on campus? What are the expectations they're going to have of us as employee relations professionals? Jenny, I'll start with you on that.
Had to unmute, didn't want to make that mistake, right? No, I so appreciate the question. And I think we've reflected on this a lot as a team this summer, because imagine kind of, always operating on a cyclical nature of your job, and sort of that while things change, a lot stays the same, right? And so you're used to sort of every year, this is what I do in the fall, this is what fall looks like. And suddenly everything that you knew about fall, has changed. But what I am reminded of is that ultimately I think that the role that we serve is always the most important role that we've served, which is to be experts on our students, right, for our employers. And that is the value add that I think that we provide. And my hope is that what we're then doing is that when we are in the room with employers and students aren't present, that we are advocating on behalf of our students in the most important ways possible, but that we are also really proactively carving out spaces for our students to be able to interface directly with our employers in ways that feel impactful and meaningful. I will share just a very quick anecdote. A couple of years ago, our office did a series called Recruiting Through a Diverse Lens, and we invited our employer partners as well as leadership of some of our student organizations, specifically those that are around culture and identity. And we asked really simple questions about what are barriers to entry? Why don't you show up at a career fair? Why don't you maybe come to a particular information session? And we really told students, be as honest as you feel comfortable being. And what surprised us the most, I think, is that how often what students commented on were things like dress code. Students told these heartbreaking stories of purchasing clothes they couldn't afford, tucking in the tags, returning them, feeling like they were out of place, that they didn't feel like they could show up and be their authentic selves. And to us, this was such a kind of pivotal moment, because this was something we could do something about. And you sort of almost felt foolish for not doing something before. And so as a result of that one simple program, we completely changed dress code, including the dress code for our career fair, to all business casual. We launched a clothing closet. We have a career development fund. There's a lot that came out of that really is in support of our low-income students, and all because we asked our students and our employers to have an honest conversation. So for me, I hope that there's even more of that, and that we feel even more willing to engage in those ways.
No, thank you. That was excellent. Lynn.
So the future of employer relations, that was the question.
Yeah, yep. So
I think exactly what Jenny said again. I think figuring out and assessing, I think our office and our director is leading us in this space as well. And we're really thinking about the data, like really trying to get not just data that we have, but again, getting information, to Jenny's point, from students to figure out what are the actual needs. I think we spend a lot of time just in general, it's like, oh, well, let's do this webinar, let's do this. Well, is that what they really need, right? And so how do we, figuring out what the need is. So I think that's going to be really critical in the work that we do. I also agree with Jenny that it's important for us to know our students. And it was interesting, in the beginning of the summer, well, maybe about a year ago, we sort of created this framework and said, these are the pillars with which we're going to see the lens how we do our work: connections, collaboration, and consultation, right? And I won't go into all those different details. And then when we think, and this was maybe last year, and then COVID comes, right? And then we're thinking out, okay, what are our priorities? Well, you know what? Those priorities are still the same, right? Now, the way we execute them and the platforms we use and how we do that are going to be a little bit differently. But now we also have this lens of diversity, DE&I work that we can superimpose on those areas. And so ultimately, I still think our work is about relationship, developing them, managing them, growing them, and making connections, whether it's with alumni, whether it's with employers, and with students, and creating those. And there was a webinar I was on listening to the other week, and they were talking about helping students become life ready versus career ready. And Sharon sort of touched on that. And I think that's, if there's anything different, that we also have to add that lens to it and amplify it. How do we ensure that our students are life ready? And I think our employers can add tremendously to that as well, as we start thinking about that.
Thank you, Lynn. Sharon, close us out.
Okay, it's really hard to follow these two. Just saying, because they're brilliant. Yes, yes, and yes. I think really, I've been spending a lot of time listening to folks in the Career Leadership Collective this summer too. And the one thing that, as employer relations professionals, at the heart of everything has got to go back to that listening tour, and echoing what Jenny and Lynn are saying, but that we need to lean into our stakeholders very deliberately and design programs. I feel like we're design thinkers. It's like we're employer relationship managers and design, and we're dabbling in this design thinking space too. And oftentimes I hear ideas, and it's like, but have you run it by anyone, And so I feel like a lot of our work this summer, in light of COVID, because we're all trying to lift up so many different kinds of programs and respond to so many different needs, I think too, for folks leading employer relations teams, we have to take moments just to hit the pause button and just check in and make certain, is this where we need to focus our attention? Back to Lynn's point, does this stand up to the goals we've set for our teams? Because there's a lot of distraction and a lot of noise. And I don't see that getting any quieter over the next few months. I feel like it's going to be intensifying, because right now we're trying to lift up fall, but knowing spring is right around the corner, and what is that going to look like? And I know Jenny talked a lot about parallel programming. That was one takeaway I remember from our last conversation. Are we going to be doing that again? And it's my hope, no to the parallel. But just please, somebody just be decisive. Let's land on a decision. so that we can engage our stakeholders in meaningful ways and not waste anyone's time.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't want to be a negative Nelly on that one, but we know it's coming, right?
No, absolutely.
Yes. That's a lot. I mean, there's so much like in our space that we have to be aware of. I like, Lynn, you talked about you have the connections, collaborations, and consultations. We have something similar in terms of a guiding philosophies for my team for year 2 in the strategy we're working on. And creating impact and creating scale, right? And so we use that to guide everything we do. And so within that, these data approaches are in there because we want to get down to how is the work that we're doing impacting our, intended targets, right? How do we make people aware of what we're even doing and what's involved in that, right? So that the right people are aware, and the people who need to be aware are aware. And then how do you, grow that and scale that to where you don't lose that signal noise, so to speak, as you grow it, because anything when it's small, it can be more effective. When you scale it, it's just like anything else, sometimes the quality can go down. I'm not all about quantity just for the sake of quantity, right? It looks good, right? We say, oh man, we had 1,500 students come to our career fair, and this is like 50% increase over last year. And they're like, wow, man, you're knocking out the park. But the real metric is, well, a couple, but if you look at, well, how many hires did employers make out of that? If we're looking at employer satisfaction, right? So, hey, what did you get out of this? The average employer, how many interviews did they conduct out of this? And how many of those interviews led to actual internship or full-time hires, right? How many students, interviewing the students, asking students, hey, what was this experience like for you? Did you get a call back from an employer? Did you get an interview? Did it lead to a job, or did it, those are the real metrics and they really let you know how well you're batting, so to speak. So I really see our roles is really transforming more into that consultative piece. I'm not saying it's not there already, but just even more, I think employers will rely on us to provide them that unique perspective and insight that we have being on campus, right? We should be talking to our counterparts in the student services and student facing team. Like I talk to my counterpart every day. She's the manager of our student facing team. I couldn't do what I do without her, because then I would just be operating in a fishbowl. And so, I do surveys with our career counselors and career coaches and try to see their perspective. Say, hey, what are you hearing from students? What are students telling you about industries they're interested in or types of jobs? Because then that informs what I do on the employer piece. And then I try to get the information that I hear from employers and feedback, that they're telling me on internships or full-time jobs or, behaviors or what have you. And I feed that back into my counterpart so that then she can say, oh, okay, this may be a workshop we need to develop to support our students or to educate them around X, Y, Z. We did that this summer. There was a student that had an issue with the virtual, with the way she was doing her virtual work, and she was being unprofessional in the sense that, and she didn't realize it's just, first time new, but she was doing things the employer felt was unprofessional. And so, it was an opportunity for us to say, hey, maybe let's create a workshop or something around this to educate students on, etiquette, typical types of etiquette that you should engage in and how we can help, coach you on that. So that your employers don't get the wrong perspective, right? I mean, we're taking into consideration a lot of things, but we still want to try to mitigate these perceptions when we can. So good stuff, guys. I know I can keep you on here forever. I know we have things to do. I am going to be respectful of my panelists' time. Thank you again so much. You'll be hearing from me soon. We're going to do this again.
This was great. Thank you so much. I took my notes too. So,
all right.
In fact, I'll be reaching out to you via email for follow-up.
please do. We have to use each other as the ultimate sounding board. So we are here for each other, and with our larger community across the U.S., with the Career Leadership Collective, shout out to Jeremy and all of his crew, Nick, Katan. They're all great people. So I enjoy, hearing from them and talking with them, and the Farouk Days, and all of these other thought leaders in our space that are really, my executive director, Tierney Bates, they're really doing some game-changing things, and we're going to carry on that mantle as well.
So, and Roderick, I don't know if you send a follow-up email, but feel free to share my email address. I didn't get to some of the questions because it would look like this, and so I got you. So I'm happy to connect with anyone who wants has questions or want to follow up.
Sounds good. Thank you all. Enjoy your day. Okay.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right.